If you look at Japan from space at night, the country glows like a ribbon of light stretching across the Pacific. From Tokyo in the east through the dense urban corridor toward Hiroshima and Fukuoka in the west, it almost feels like one endless megacity, a chain of neon in motion that never really sleeps. But then, just off the coast near Osaka, something strange appears. A dark gap, a quiet patch in the middle of all that brightness. That shadow belongs to Shikoku, Japan's fourth largest island. And here's the mystery. By almost every traditional measure, Shikoku should be thriving. It sits close to major economic centers, surrounded by one of the world's most developed countries, connected by modern infrastructure, and rich in natural beauty and history. On paper, it looks like the perfect place for growth. But reality tells a different story. Instead of booming, Shikoku is slowly emptying. Towns are shrinking, populations are aging, and entire communities are fading into silence. So what happened here? Why does one of Japan's largest islands feel like a blank spot in a country famous for density and urban energy? To understand why Shikoku stands apart, we first need to look at the land itself, because geography, as always, tells the first part of the story. Let's start with where Shikoku actually sits, because when you glance at a map of Japan, your eyes almost automatically gravitate toward Honshu, the massive main island that curves like a backbone through the country. That's where Tokyo, Osaka, and Kyoto dominate the landscape, the cultural, political, and economic heart of Japan. Maybe your attention then drifts north toward snowy Hokkaido, or south toward the subtropical energy of Kyushu. And quietly tucked beneath Honshu, almost hiding in plain sight within the calm waters of the Seto Inland Sea, lies Japan's fourth largest island, Shikoku, a place many people barely notice at all. Which is strange, because in terms of location alone, Shikoku should be thriving. Its northern coast sits tantalizingly close to major industrial centers like Hiroshima and Okayama. And it's roughly 100 kilometers from Osaka, Japan's second largest metropolitan region. On a clear day, it feels like you could almost wave across the water to the main island. Yet despite this proximity, Shikoku exists as a geographic paradox, simultaneously right in the middle of Japan, and yet strangely disconnected from it. And that's because in Japan, geography is destiny, and Shikoku was dealt a particularly challenging hand. The island covers about 18,800 square kilometers smaller than Sardinia or Vermont, but size isn't the issue. The real story is the terrain. Shikoku is one of the most rugged and sharply divided landscapes in the Japanese archipelago. Its defining characteristic isn't what it has, but what it lacks. Unlike much of Japan, which is shaped by volcanic activity that creates fertile soils and broad plateaus, Shikoku is the only major island without active volcanoes. While explosive eruptions help sculpt rich farmland elsewhere, Shikoku was formed through intense tectonic compression, essentially squeezed and folded into a mountainous barrier. Running straight across the northern part of the island is the Median Tectonic Line, Japan's longest fault system. This massive geological boundary splits Shikoku into two very different worlds. To the north lies the inner zone, facing the Seto Inland Sea. Geologically tied to Honshu's Chugoku region, this area contains the few gentle slopes and alluvial plains available on the island, including the Sanuki Plain in Kagawa Prefecture. Sheltered from the open Pacific, the northern coast enjoys a mild, almost Mediterranean-like climate with relatively low rainfall. It sounds ideal, and in some ways it is, but there's a catch. Steep mountains block incoming moisture, and short rivers offer little water storage. For centuries, northern communities didn't struggle against cold or snow, they struggled against drought. Zoom in on satellite imagery today and you'll notice thousands of tiny dots scattered across the landscape. Those aren't natural ponds, they're man-made reservoirs, many dug by hand over 1,000 years ago just to store enough water for survival. Imagine needing an entire network of artificial lakes just to keep farming possible. That's Shikoku's northern reality. Cross the central mountain range, however, and it feels like entering a completely different world. Welcome to the outer zone, the Pacific-facing southern half of the island dominated by the dramatic Shikoku Mountains, and these aren't gentle hills. Jagged peaks rise sharply, culminating in Mount Ishizuchi, the highest mountain in western Japan. Acting like a massive atmospheric wall, these mountains force warm, moisture-heavy winds from the Pacific to rise rapidly, dumping torrential rain along the southern coast. So while the north prays for rain, the south often drowns in it. Kochi Prefecture, located along this southern coastline, ranks among the wettest regions in Japan and sits directly in the path of typhoons, roaring up what's often called Typhoon Alley. The geography here is breathtaking, but brutally unfriendly to large-scale settlement. Mountains plunge directly into the sea, leaving almost no flat coastal plains for major cities. On a topographic map, the coastline resembles the edge of a saw blade, steep cliffs and drowned river valleys forming deep inlets that look spectacular but offer little room for urban expansion. This north-south divide creates a fascinating, almost tragic geographic trap. The north has the flat land but historically lacked water. The south has abundant rainfall but almost no buildable terrain. And wedged between them lies what many call the Tibet of Japan, the mountainous interior so steep and isolated that for much of history, it might as well have been a blank spot on the map. Deep valleys, carved by emerald rivers like the Yoshino and the Shimanto, slice through this rugged interior. The Shimanto River is often called Japan's last clear stream because no major dams have been constructed along it, not out of environmental activism, but simply because there isn't enough population nearby to justify one. This terrain didn't just shape the landscape, it shaped the culture and history of the island. The mountains fragmented Shikoku into 4 distinct regions. In fact, the name Shikoku literally means 4 provinces. Travel across the island was historically so difficult that it was often easier for northern residents to sail across the sea to Honshu than to cross the mountains to visit neighbors on their own island. So here we have a place split by fault lines, lacking fertile volcanic soils, battered by typhoons in the south, plagued by drought in the north, and guarded by an almost impenetrable wall of mountains in the center. It's stunningly beautiful, but it's not exactly a blueprint for explosive population growth. And to understand why Shikoku continues to empty today, we need to look at how this challenging geography shaped the people who tried to live here. Because isolation didn't just separate landscapes, it separated communities themselves. For most of its history, Shikoku wasn't even considered a single unified place. To the imperial court in Kyoto, and later the shoguns ruling from Edo, it was simply Shikoku, literally meaning 4 provinces. These were Awa, Tosa, Sanuki, and Iyo. And thanks to the island's brutally difficult terrain, these regions developed almost as separate worlds. The central mountains weren't just an inconvenience, they were a near impenetrable barrier. Travel between provinces was so difficult that communities just a few dozen kilometers apart evolved with different dialects, different food cultures, and different political loyalties. A fisherman from the stormy Pacific coast of Tosa, modern-day Kochi, might have felt more connected to the ocean itself than to a merchant in Sanuki, modern-day Kagawa, on the northern plains. Geography didn't just shape the landscape here, it shaped identity. But to the ruling powers on Honshu, Shikoku served another, slightly darker role. It was, in many ways, a prison. Separated from the capital by the Seto Inland Sea, Shikoku was close enough to monitor, but far enough away to isolate political rivals. Exiled nobles and disgraced figures could be sent there, removed from power without being entirely forgotten. One of the most famous exiles was Emperor Sutoku. After losing a bitter struggle for the throne in the 12th century, he was banished to the northern plains of Shikoku. Legend claims he spent his final years writing sutras in his own blood, cursing the court that had rejected him before dying in misery. Whether entirely true or slightly dramatized over centuries, the story reinforced Shikoku's reputation as a beautiful but lonely cage for the unwanted. Yet while political leaders saw isolation, spiritual leaders saw opportunity. In the 8th century, A monk named Kukai, later known as Kobodaishi, transformed the island's identity. Born in Shikoku, he founded Shingon Buddhism and established what would become one of Japan's most famous spiritual journeys, the Shikoku pilgrimage. This 1,200-kilometer circular route connects 88 temples around the island's perimeter. For more than 1,000 years, this pilgrimage became the main thread linking the otherwise disconnected provinces. And here's the irony. While mainland Japan built massive infrastructure, like the Tokaido Road to connect economic centers, Shikoku's primary highway was essentially a walking trail for pilgrims. This helped create a deeply rooted culture of hospitality known as osetai, where locals provide food and shelter to traveling pilgrims. It fostered strong community bonds, but it didn't create the dense commercial networks or urban growth seen in places like Osaka or Edo, modern-day Tokyo. As Japan entered the feudal era, Shikoku's isolation also shaped its political character. The Tosa domain in the south, cut off by mountains and facing the open Pacific, developed a fiercely independent spirit. Distance from central authority bred a unique social structure and, perhaps more importantly, a simmering resentment toward the shogunate ruling from Edo. Which brings us to one of the greatest ironies in Japanese history. When American black ships arrived in the mid-19th century and forced Japan to open to the outside world, the movement that overthrew the shogunate didn't come from the polished elites of the capital. Instead, key leaders emerged from remote domains, including Tosa. Samurai from southern Shikoku, most famously Sakamoto Ryoma, played a crucial role in dismantling the old order and restoring imperial rule during the Meiji Restoration. In a twist worthy of a historical drama, the island, once used to exile political threats, helped give birth to modern Japan itself. So, you might expect Shikoku to be rewarded with prosperity once the new Meiji government took power. Instead, the opposite happened. The Meiji era focused on rapid industrialization. Japan needed flat land for factories, deep water ports for massive steel ships, and efficient rail networks to connect growing cities. Shikoku, unfortunately, had very little of these advantages. As industrialization surged across Honshu, especially along the corridor between Tokyo and Hiroshima, Shikoku remained largely agrarian. Its mountains blocked railway expansion, and its fragmented geography made large-scale urban planning difficult. The four historical provinces were reorganized into modern prefectures, but economically, the island struggled to keep up. By the time World War II ended and Japan launched its remarkable economic recovery, Shikoku was already trailing behind. Government investment focused heavily on the Pacific belt of Honshu, where industrial output could be maximized. Shikoku became more of a resource supplier, producing citrus fruit, timber, and paper, rather than a center of innovation or industry. And this is where the real long-term problem began. As Japan rebuilt and glittering skylines rose across Osaka and Tokyo, young people in Shikoku started looking across the water and asking a simple but powerful question. Why am I still here? If you look at a population density map of Japan today, the contrast is impossible to miss. Honshu glows with dense clusters of cities stretching like a continuous ribbon of light. Kyushu hums with industrial energy. Even Hokkaido, far to the north, has the dense urban core of Sapporo shining brightly. But Shikoku? It looks dim, and every year it's growing darker. Today, the entire island is home to roughly 3.6 million people, less than 3% of Japan's total population. To put that into perspective, the greater Tokyo region moves about that many people through its train stations every single morning. And the most worrying part isn't just the current number, it's the trend. While Japan's overall population began declining in 2011, Shikoku has been losing residents for decades. The island's population actually peaked back in 1950 and has been slowly shrinking ever since. So why is this happening? Why, in one of the most densely populated countries on Earth, is its fourth largest island slowly hollowing out? The answer lies in a cruel economic paradox, one involving the very thing that was supposed to save it, a bridge to Honshu. For much of the 20th century, People in Shikoku believed their economic struggles were caused by isolation. The solution seemed obvious: build a direct connection to the mainland. If only they could drive straight to Osaka, prosperity would follow. In 1988, that dream became reality, with the opening of the Seto Ohashi Bridge, an engineering marvel consisting of double-deck bridges stretching 13 kilometers across the Seto Inland Sea. It was marketed as Shikoku's gateway to the future. But instead of bringing prosperity in, it began pulling life out. Economists describe this as the straw effect. Imagine placing a straw into a smaller glass, and drinking the flow moves in one direction. By directly linking Shikoku's smaller economy with the massive industrial engine of Osaka and Honshu, the bridge made it easier for businesses and consumers to leave rather than invest locally. Instead of companies building factories on Shikoku, firms on Honshu simply shipped goods across the bridge, undercutting local manufacturers. Instead of young people staying and building careers at home, they used the bridge to travel first for shopping trips, then for education, and eventually for permanent relocation. Ironically, the very isolation that once held Shikoku back had also protected its local economy. And when that protective barrier disappeared, the island struggled to compete. But the infrastructure story doesn't end there, because something else never arrived. Japan is famous for its Shinkansen high-speed rail network, the arteries that connect the country's major economic centers. The bullet train reaches deep into Kyushu in the south and extends north toward Hokkaido, where future expansions will link to Sapporo. Yet, when you look at the Shinkansen map, one glaring gap stands out. Shikoku is the only major Japanese island without high-speed rail. Plans existed. In 1973, a Shinkansen line connecting to Shikoku was proposed. But after Japan's economic bubble burst in the 1990s, and as doubts grew about the economic impact of the bridge, the project was frozen. Today, traveling from Tokyo to the Shikoku capital of Matsuyama takes nearly 6 hours and requires multiple transfers. In a country where speed equals opportunity, Shikoku feels distant, not just geographically, but economically. The result has been a demographic crisis, even by Japanese standards. Shikoku is now the oldest island within one of the oldest countries in the world. In rural areas of Kochi and Tokushima prefectures, more than 40% of residents are over the age of 65. Entire communities have entered what researchers call the stage of marginal villages, where populations have aged to the point that basic services, road maintenance, snow clearing, even local governance become difficult to sustain. The Japanese government sees Shikoku as both a warning and a test case. If demographic decline continues nationwide, the rest of Japan could eventually face similar challenges. In response, officials have launched aggressive revitalization programs. Initiatives like the Local Vitalization Cooperator Program pay urban residents to relocate to rural areas, start businesses, or revive agriculture. Some success stories exist. The town of Kamiyama in Tokushima, for example, installed high-speed fiber optic internet throughout its mountainous landscape, attracting satellite offices for Tokyo tech companies. The image is almost surreal. Young programmers coding in renovated farmhouses surrounded by rice fields. But statistically, these successes remain small compared to the overall trend. For every one remote worker moving in, many more high school graduates leave. Census data from 2020 confirm the reality. Despite subsidies, affordable housing schemes, and workation campaigns, every prefecture on Shikoku continued to lose population. The island has become trapped in a negative feedback loop. Fewer people mean fewer trains and services. Fewer services make it harder to build businesses. Fewer jobs push young people to leave, which leads to even fewer people, and so the cycle continues. The tragedy of Shikoku isn't that it failed to modernize. It's that it tried, and the modern world decided it wasn't enough. Yet, that's also why Shikoku remains so fascinating. In many ways, it's the canary in the coal mine for Japan's demographic future, a preview of challenges that may soon affect the entire country. And perhaps, just maybe, it will also become the place where Japan finally discovers how to reverse that trend. If you enjoyed exploring the mystery of Shikoku, be sure to check out the next video about Haiti Island. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.